The morning sun had barely begun to pierce through the tall windows of the downtown courthouse. But inside, the air was already thick with the weight of anticipation. The wooden benches, polished over decades, reflected a cold formality that contrasted sharply with the soft shuffle of footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Spectators whispered in low tones, their eyes darting toward the front, where the trial was set to begin. The hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional clearing of a throat, underscored the seriousness of the day. It was a trial like many others, yet the presence of a tiny, 3-year-old girl in the back of the courtroom promised a subtle disruption to the expected decorum. Seated beside her mother, the little girl swung her legs gently, almost in rhythm with her soft humming. Her wide, curious eyes took in the room, the stern faces of lawyers, the polished desk of the judge, the uniformed officers stationed near the defendant. Everything seemed monumental to her, from the high ceilings to the ornate chandeliers, and even the quiet intensity of the spectators caught her attention. Her mother, struggling to keep her daughter from exploring too much, gently tugged on her hand, whispering reminders to remain seated. But the child's fascination with her surroundings was palpable. She observed everything with an intense, unfiltered curiosity that only a toddler could possess, noticing details that adults overlooked: the polished shine of the gavel, the faint reflection of the sunlight on the courtroom windows, the quiet way the stenographer's fingers danced across the keyboard. At the front of the room, the defendant sat flanked by his attorney and a police officer with his canine partner. The dog was a majestic creature, sitting perfectly still on a mat, tail occasionally swishing as though marking time in a rhythm only it could sense. Its dark, intelligent eyes scanned the room calmly, unaffected by the tense atmosphere, the whispers, and the occasional cough. The officer, standing nearby, occasionally adjusted the leash, but mostly allowed the dog to remain serene, knowing it was trained to withstand the chaos of real-life situations. To the child, however, this dog was not a part of any procedural hierarchy. It was simply there, a living, breathing presence that radiated calmness amidst the nervous energy of the courtroom. The judge, a seasoned veteran of the bench, arrived shortly after the spectators settled. His robe swished with a measured authority as he took his place behind the elevated desk. He scanned the courtroom briefly, eyes lingering momentarily on the mother and her daughter in the gallery. There was a subtle warmth in his gaze, perhaps born from years of observing human nature in its most varied forms. The gavel struck once, sharply, demanding attention. "Court is now in session," he intoned, his voice firm but not unkind. The room fell silent, the only sounds being the careful shuffle of papers and the quiet tapping of keyboards. As proceedings began, the little girl's attention wandered. The words exchanged by the lawyers were complex, laden with legal jargon that made little sense to someone her age. But she did not seem lost. Rather, she absorbed the tone, the body language, and the energy in the room. She noticed the defendant's shifting gaze, the occasional cough from a juror, and the intense focus of the court reporter. Her eyes, however, kept drifting back to the dog. Unlike the humans, whose movements and expressions were complicated and sometimes intimidating, the dog remained steadfast and calm. There was an inexplicable reassurance in its presence, something that drew the child's gaze again and again. Her mother whispered, "Stay here, sweetie." Quiet now, brushing a loose strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. The girl nodded, but only partially. Her tiny fingers played with the folds of her dress as she tried to remain still, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm of her own thoughts. She could sense the tension, the weight of the courtroom's seriousness pressing down like a tangible force. Yet, in the dog, she found a curious contrast: calm, watchful, and completely unbothered. It was as if the animal existed in a different realm, immune to the pressures that gripped the humans around it. The trial commenced with the prosecution presenting the charges and accusation of theft, a dispute that had embroiled a local business and the defendant. Evidence was laid out systematically: receipts, surveillance footage, and witness statements. The adults around her reacted with nods, frowns, and whispered comments, but the little girl's world remained focused elsewhere. She leaned slightly forward, her small chin resting on the edge of the bench, her eyes never leaving the dog. To her, the proceedings were a blur of incomprehensible words, but the dog's stillness was a comforting constant in the storm of adult seriousness. The K-9 officer occasionally adjusted the leash, maintaining a professional demeanor. The dog remained seated, obedient, and poised, scanning the courtroom with an intensity that only heightened the little girl's fascination. She tilted her head slightly, as though trying to understand why the dog could remain so calm when everyone else seemed so anxious. There was a magnetic pull in its presence, a silent communication that resonated with her in ways words could not. She could feel the energy, the patience, the alertness, and the gentle restraint. The child's mind, though small, made sense of it intuitively. This dog was different. Time seemed to stretch as witnesses gave their testimony, each moment thick with tension. The mother whispered reassurances occasionally, smoothing the child's hair or gently adjusting her posture. Yet, despite attempts to focus her attention elsewhere, the little girl could not look away. The dog's eyes seemed to follow the proceedings, tracking subtle movements, listening, understanding in a way that captivated her completely. Even the judge's voice, commanding and serious, could not pull her gaze from the animal. In that moment, the courtroom was a stage, and she, unnoticed by most, had found a performer whose discipline and serenity fascinated her completely. Even the defendant, sensing the unusual presence of a young child in the gallery, cast a glance toward her. He was momentarily disarmed by her tiny figure and the innocence radiating from her wide eyes. For a fleeting second, the tension that had gripped him since the trial began softened. He noticed the child's curiosity, untainted by fear or judgment, and a strange warmth stirred inside him. Perhaps it was a reminder of the world beyond legal disputes, or maybe it was the purity of her observation, a reminder that life's small, unguarded moments often carry more truth than any courtroom testimony. As the morning wore on, the girl's curiosity only grew. Her fingers now fidgeted in her lap, as she leaned slightly sideways to get a better view. Her mother whispered again, gently but firmly, reminding her to stay quiet. The child nodded, eyes fixed on the dog, absorbing every subtle motion. The officer's voice, low and calm, occasionally reassured the animal, who responded with a quiet shift in position, never breaking composure. The courtroom's tension, layered with legal authority and formal procedure, contrasted sharply with the simplicity of this silent interaction. For the little girl, it was a world of wonder, discovery, and calm amid the storm. Hours could have passed, yet in her mind, the trial had already transformed into a stage for an unlikely friendship. She did not fully understand the proceedings, nor did she care. Her tiny finger occasionally twitched, as if it longed to point at the dog, to acknowledge its presence. Something unspoken connected them, a mutual awareness, a recognition that transcended language, age, and circumstance. The courtroom, with its stiff rules, echoing gavel strikes, and nervous energy, had become a place of silent observation, where a toddler and a trained police dog shared an unexpected bond in the midst of a serious legal battle. The trial continued, and the courtroom's atmosphere thickened with seriousness. Lawyers leaned forward, exchanging papers and whispering strategy, while the judge meticulously reviewed evidence, occasionally tapping the gavel to maintain order. Witnesses testified, and the defendant answered questions with careful precision. Adults around the room were absorbed, some frowning, some scribbling notes, each reacting to the legal complexities in their own way. But in the gallery, a small 3-year-old girl sat mesmerized by something entirely different. Her wide eyes were fixed on the police dog at the front, the creature's calm and collected presence overshadowing the words of the trial. The dog, a large German shepherd with a glossy coat, sat with its head high and eyes alert. Its ears twitched occasionally, but it remained motionless otherwise, exuding a serene discipline that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy of the courtroom. Its tail rested quietly on the floor, flicking once or twice in a subtle rhythm that seemed almost meditative. To the girl, the dog was magnificent, silent yet expressive, commanding attention without a single word. She leaned slightly forward, her small hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench as though wanting to absorb every detail. Her mother whispered gently, "Sweetie, remember, quiet now." The girl nodded briefly, but could not tear her eyes away. The courtroom, in all its rigid formality, seemed to fade around her, leaving only the dog and the subtle interactions she observed. Every movement mattered. The slight tilt of the dog's head, the officer's hand resting lightly on the leash, the calm gaze that seemed to survey the room without judgment. The girl's mind, innocent yet perceptive, registered these small details in ways adults might overlook entirely. She was captivated by the quiet confidence emanating from the dog, an animal who existed in the middle of tension, yet remained untouched by it. Around them, the trial pressed on. The prosecution presented video evidence, showing footage from the scene of the alleged theft. Lawyers gestured emphatically, pointing at screens, highlighting inconsistencies, and building arguments. The defendant's attorney countered with meticulous observations, dissecting every statement and timeline. Adults leaned in, whispered to each other, and occasionally shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But the little girl, oblivious to the legal wrangling, noticed instead the way the dog remained completely unfazed. She watched its eyes follow the movements in the room, noting how it seemed to understand more than the chatter around it. There was a calm awareness in its gaze that drew her in deeper with each passing minute. She tilted her head slightly, curiosity sparking a question in her young mind. Why could the dog stay so calm when everyone else seemed so nervous? The courtroom smelled of polished wood, old leather, and faint traces of perfume, but her senses were tuned entirely to the presence of the animal. She watched the officer adjust his stance subtly, ensuring the dog remained comfortable, and she noted how the leash's slack allowed freedom without compromising control. There was a silent dialogue happening, imperceptible to the rest of the room, but fully visible to her keen observation. The girl's fascination was more than childish curiosity. It was a genuine recognition of a bond and discipline she did not yet have words to describe. Across the aisle, the judge observed the courtroom with his usual meticulous attention. He had seen many trials, but few moments like this. A toddler so absorbed the presence of a police dog had ever crossed his bench. He allowed proceedings to continue, noting the rare authenticity in her gaze. Something about the innocence and attention of a child reminded him, even in a world governed by rules and evidence, of the value of unfiltered perception. The courtroom's stern walls suddenly felt less rigid, softened slightly by the gentle gravity of the child's focus. The defendant, meanwhile, was distracted in a different way. He noticed the girl pointing subtly at the dog, her tiny hand trembling slightly with restrained excitement. He frowned at first, unsure why his attention kept being drawn to the gallery, but then a small smile crept across his face. The courtroom's intensity seemed to fade momentarily for him as well, replaced by a fleeting awareness of innocence and simplicity in a world otherwise dominated by rules and tension. The girl's focus had created an unexpected ripple effect, humans noticing something they had overlooked, compelled by the purity of a child's perception. The little girl's fascination was accompanied by quiet anticipation. She leaned forward just a fraction more, her tiny finger twitching as if it longed to touch the dog, but unsure if she could. She whispered a soft, barely audible, "Hi," directed at the animal, which did not respond overtly, but shifted slightly, acknowledging the human presence without breaking its calm composure. The officer's hand subtly tightened on the leash, ensuring the dog's attention remained under control, yet he allowed the child's gaze to connect. Even the adults in the courtroom noticed the exchange, a small, almost imperceptible smile crossing the face of the mother as she watched her daughter's curiosity blossom. Time stretched, and the trial's proceedings continued around them. Lawyers presented testimony from witnesses who had observed the theft, each recalling details with precision. Adults leaned in, whispered, and scribbled notes. But to the child, none of it mattered. She was witnessing a silent performance, the dog's perfect posture, its calm vigilance, the subtle interplay between officer and canine. She noted the way the dog's eyes shifted slightly to follow movement, yet never left its position. The girl absorbed these details like a sponge, her imagination beginning to craft stories around the dog's patience and attention. The mother whispered again, gently urging her daughter to remain quiet. "Remember, we're here for the trial," she said, though her eyes betrayed her own amusement at the little girl's unwavering focus. The child nodded again, but was already lost in observation. She noticed the dog's fur glinting in the sunlight, the careful positioning of its paws, the quiet rhythm of its breathing. Each detail fascinated her, and the longer she watched, the more she felt a connection. It was as if, in this formal, rigid environment, the dog represented calm, reassurance, and understanding, and she instinctively recognized it. As the morning progressed, whispers of curiosity began to ripple through the courtroom. Some observers noticed the child's pointed attention and quiet fascination. A few exchanged knowing glances, smiling at the unusual distraction in a courtroom otherwise dominated by tension. The judge, now fully aware, allowed proceedings to continue while subtly observing the interaction. There was something remarkable about the innocence of the child's attention, a reminder that even in the most serious procedural environments, moments of humanity and wonder could appear unexpectedly. By late morning, the girl's fascination had reached a point where she could no longer contain herself. Her small body leaned forward slightly, her tiny hand lifting just enough to point directly at the dog. Her voice, soft but surprisingly clear, cut through the low murmur of the courtroom. "Good boy," she said. The words, though brief, were loaded with sincerity and observation. Heads turned, the judge paused mid-note, and the courtroom collectively paused, stunned by the simplicity and impact of the statement. The officer smiled gently at the dog, murmuring praise, while the judge's stern face softened into a warm, amused expression. The defendant glanced up in surprise, his tension momentarily diffused by the unexpected innocence before him. Whispers spread quickly through the room, not of scandal or argument, but of admiration and amusement. In that single moment, the little girl had disrupted the expected flow of the trial, reminding everyone that even the most serious environments were not immune to the quiet power of observation, empathy, and simplicity. The courtroom, already tense from hours of legal arguments and witness testimony, fell into a sudden hush. The small voice of a 3-year-old girl, quiet yet clear, pierced the ambient chatter. "Good boy." Heads snapped toward the gallery. The judge, mid-note on his legal pad, froze, eyebrows rising in surprise. A ripple of murmurs spread among the spectators, whispers carrying a mix of amusement, curiosity, and delight. It was a brief, unassuming phrase, just 2 words, yet it carried a weight that none in the room had expected. The child's eyes remained fixed on the police dog, her tiny fingers still extended, pointing at the calm creature that had captured her attention for so long. The police officer, initially startled by the sudden sound, glanced down at his dog. The German shepherd shifted slightly, but remained seated, tail sweeping softly against the mat in acknowledgement. The officer crouched a little, murmuring praise in a quiet, controlled tone. "Good job, buddy." The dog's ears flicked, and it gave a soft, barely audible exhale, as if understanding the compliment offered across the room. The courtroom's formal energy seemed to bend around this singular moment of innocence. A collective warmth spread through the spectators, breaking the rigidity that had dominated the proceedings for hours. The judge leaned forward slightly, a faint, genuine smile spreading across his face. He rarely showed emotion in open court, and even fewer times did he acknowledge the gallery. Yet here was a child, simple, honest, and completely unaware of courtroom protocol, and somehow her words had humanized the room. He glanced over at the mother, whose eyes were wide with both pride and mild embarrassment, and nodded subtly. No words were necessary. The acknowledgement was enough. The courtroom had paused not for evidence, not for law, but for a pure human moment of observation and connection. Whispers rippled through the audience. Some jurors smiled, attempting to hide it behind folded hands. A few of the attorneys exchanged glances, amused at the innocence of it all. The defendant, caught between surprise and the unusual levity, allowed a small smirk to surface. Even the bailiff, rigid and formal in his posture, couldn't help but shake his head slightly with a quiet chuckle. It was impossible to remain unaffected. The child's words had pierced the formality of the court, reminding everyone present that even in a room dominated by rules, discipline, and seriousness, humanity could shine through in its simplest form. The little girl's gaze never wavered. Her attention remained riveted on the police dog, as though she had just discovered the most important truth in the room. Her tiny finger, still pointing, trembled with restrained excitement. The dog, trained to remain composed in all situations, seemed to acknowledge her sincerity without breaking its stoic demeanor. The interaction, though unspoken, was profound. There was an invisible connection forged between human and animal, one that the adults in the courtroom could sense but not fully participate in. The simplicity of Good Boy had created a bridge across ages and roles, a reminder that understanding does not always require words, contracts, or authority. The mother whispered gently, trying to maintain control. "She, sweetie?" Quiet. Her voice carried both caution and pride. She marveled at her daughter's audacity and honesty, realizing that her tiny child had managed to capture the attention of an entire courtroom without even understanding why it mattered. She smoothed a stray lock of hair from the girl's forehead, her own hands trembling slightly. Pride, surprise, and amusement wove together in a tangle of emotions she had not anticipated. The moment was fleeting yet monumental, a reminder of how innocence could influence even the most serious adult spaces. The officer, kneeling slightly to check on the dog, whispered once more, "Good boy, stay calm." The dog shifted minimally, but remained seated, tail tapping lightly, exuding an aura of patience and steadiness. The officer's eyes flicked briefly toward the gallery, catching the child's gaze for a split second. He nodded, a small, silent acknowledgement of her words. In that exchange, there was no need for formal communication, just understanding and recognition. The dog's discipline, combined with the child's pure observation, had transformed a tense courtroom moment into one of quiet connection, leaving everyone else momentarily suspended in shared humanity. The judge, regaining composure, allowed the trial to resume, but could not entirely mask the warmth in his expression. His eyes lingered for a moment longer on the child, then on the dog, before returning to the legal proceedings. "Proceed," he said, his voice calm but carrying a subtle softness that hadn't been there earlier. The attorneys continued their arguments, but the courtroom had shifted. People's postures were slightly less rigid. A few jurors' shoulders relaxed. Even the defendant seemed lighter, no longer trapped entirely in the weight of scrutiny and legal anticipation. The brief intrusion of innocence had altered the energy of the room. The courtroom reporters, trying to maintain professional focus, exchanged quiet smiles. Some scribbled notes not about the trial, but about the extraordinary small moment unfolding before them. Cameras, if present for documentation, likely caught the child's small gesture and the dog's subtle acknowledgement. Outside the courtroom, this tiny episode would become the story that resonated beyond the city walls, a reminder that law, discipline, and procedure could coexist with warmth, humor, and human empathy. The girl, satisfied for the moment, leaned back slightly, her finger lowering but her eyes still fixed on the dog. The officer maintained his calm posture, aware that the child's presence had introduced an unusual variable into the room. He did not react overtly, but the subtle shift in his gaze suggested appreciation for the innocence and honesty in her observation. Even in a professional environment, he understood that sometimes the smallest gestures, words as simple as "good boy," could create connections that went beyond protocol or training. Meanwhile, the defendant, observing quietly, could not suppress a fleeting thought. There was a simplicity here he had long forgotten. The courtroom, a place often marked by confrontation, evidence, and judgment, had suddenly become a scene of unexpected warmth. A child had reminded him, however briefly, that observation, honesty, and kindness existed even in the most formal spaces. He returned his attention to his attorney, but the warmth lingered, a subtle undercurrent that had diffused the severity of the morning. The judge, finishing a review of the next piece of evidence, allowed the proceedings to continue, but the earlier moment remained alive in the room. Even as lawyers resumed arguments and witnesses prepared to testify, there was a lingering sense of calm and connection. The child, her curiosity now partially satisfied, occasionally glanced back at the dog, her expression a mix of wonder and quiet pride. The officer maintained his composure, the dog remained disciplined, and the courtroom carried forward with an unspoken recognition. For a moment, innocence had asserted itself, reshaping the energy of an entire legal space with nothing more than two simple words. By mid-morning, the trial had shifted subtly. Spectators, staff, and legal personnel moved with a lighter air. Though the arguments and testimony continued, the memory of the child's words resonated. It became a quiet story circulating among those present, a reminder that even amid the gravitas of law and judgment, moments of innocence and simplicity could create extraordinary, unforgettable connections. And for the 3-year-old, though unaware of the broader impact, the moment was everything. A recognition, a connection, and a tiny act of courage in a big, formal world. The courtroom held its collective breath as the judge paused, gavel hovering momentarily above the bench, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the unexpected scene. The child's tiny voice, innocent and unguarded, had interrupted the rigid rhythm of legal proceedings with a simple acknowledgement. "Good boy." The courtroom had quieted, all attention converging on the gallery where the mother sat nervously beside her daughter. The judge's expression softened, revealing a warmth rarely seen in a courtroom dominated by rules, evidence, and procedure. For a moment, the trial felt suspended in a rare human pause. He leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on the polished surface of his bench. "Well," he said, his voice measured but gentle, "it seems we have a keen observer in the gallery today." The words, though subtle, carried a surprising weight. They acknowledged the child's presence and her instinctive connection with the police dog, without disrupting the seriousness of the proceedings. There was a pause, a flicker of amusement in his eyes as he glanced at the mother, who tried to suppress a shy smile, and then at the little girl, whose gaze remained fixed on the dog. The child, sensing the judge's attention, but not fully understanding it, tilted her head slightly. Her small lips parted, perhaps to speak, but no words came. Instead, she wiggled a little in her seat, fascinated by the reaction she had provoked. In that simple gesture, the courtroom collectively softened. Jurors exchanged subtle smiles behind folded hands. A few lawyers chuckled quietly, careful not to interrupt the formality of their roles. The defendant, who had been tense and defensive, allowed a fleeting grin to emerge. Even the officers present, accustomed to chaos and tension in their daily work, acknowledged the purity of the moment with silent nods. The police officer crouched slightly to soothe the dog, murmuring praise under his breath. The German shepherd, fully trained to maintain composure in high-stress situations, responded with the slightest tail flick, acknowledging both the officer's words and the unspoken admiration from the gallery. The child's attention never wavered. She was absorbing everything: the calm authority of the dog, the judge's rare smile, the subtle acknowledgement of the people around her. She didn't understand the legal nuances, the evidence being presented, or the stakes of the trial. But she instinctively understood one thing: this was a moment of recognition, a bridge between innocence and authority. The judge straightened in his seat, allowing a small, thoughtful pause to linger in the room. "It is refreshing," he said, "to see such attention to detail, even from the youngest among us. Observing, noticing, appreciating, that is sometimes the greatest skill of all." His voice carried a tone of quiet reverence, a subtle nod to the child's unintentional impact. The words echoed softly across the wooden benches, reverberating through the courtroom. They were simple, yet layered with significance. The legal matter at hand had momentarily taken a back seat to something more universal, a recognition of innocence, observation, and the quiet power of empathy. Spectators shifted in their seats, some leaning slightly forward, as if absorbing the gravity of the judge's acknowledgement. It was rare to witness a judge's humanity displayed so openly in a courtroom, where authority often overshadowed personal expression. The little girl, meanwhile, remained enraptured by the dog, her small hand pointing gently, almost reverently. Her mother, eyes glistening, brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, silently thanking the judge for the warmth he had extended. The courtroom, despite its formal purpose, had softened into a space where human connection and compassion could exist alongside justice. The defendant, seated across from the prosecution, felt the tension in his shoulders ease ever so slightly. His eyes had been trained on the trial's outcome, on every word, gesture, and nuance. But the child's simple words had cracked through the rigidity of the room. For a fleeting moment, he glimpsed the human side of everyone around him: the judge, the jury, the officers, and even himself. A smile tugged at his lips, small but genuine. The two words had become more than an acknowledgement of a dog. They were a reminder that even in tense, high-stakes moments, there was space for warmth, for humanity, and for levity. The officer returned his attention to the dog, who remained seated with quiet dignity. The canine's eyes swept the courtroom, scanning with awareness, yet retaining the serene presence that had captivated the child. The interaction between the toddler and the dog was subtle but profound. It demonstrated a connection that transcended language, age, and circumstance. In the stillness of the room, an unspoken understanding had formed, a silent communication bridging innocence, training, and observation. The courtroom, rigid in its protocol, had become a witness to something more intimate, more human than the trial itself. Whispers rippled through the gallery, quiet enough not to disrupt the ongoing proceedings, but loud enough to carry the collective sentiment, admiration and delight at the small child who had reminded them all of something elemental. Some spectators quietly commented on the unexpected charm of the moment. Others simply smiled, allowing themselves a brief respite from the seriousness of law and evidence. The mother, her own pride shining through, adjusted her daughter's dress and whispered reassurance, though the girl's attention remained glued to the dog. She did not yet understand why everyone was reacting, but she sensed the importance of her words. The judge's eyes lingered on the gallery for a moment longer before returning to the matter at hand. His tone, while returning to professional authority, carried a subtle softness. "Proceed," he said, signaling the continuation of the trial. Yet, the energy of the courtroom had shifted. Where once tension and anticipation had dominated, there was now an undercurrent of warmth and subtle amusement. The child's intervention, brief and unassuming, had altered the room's atmosphere. The rigid seriousness of legal proceedings now coexisted with a small, persistent human tenderness that permeated the room. Even the court reporter, fingers poised above the keyboard, paused slightly to observe the exchange. The mundane rhythm of recording testimony had been punctuated by an extraordinary moment, a reminder that life often inserted bursts of humanity into the most structured environments. The stenographer allowed herself a small, quiet smile, acknowledging the innocence and clarity of the child's observation. For all the legal arguments, documents, and testimony, this simple acknowledgement, "Good boy," was proving to be one of the most memorable events of the morning. Outside the courtroom, this moment would soon become a story of its own. The simplicity, the innocence, the warmth of it was a narrative far removed from legal jargon and procedural authority. For the 3-year-old, it was merely an expression of observation, a natural reaction to a calm, reassuring presence. For the adults in the room, it was a profound reminder that even in spaces dominated by rules and judgment, humanity, curiosity, and kindness could emerge unexpectedly. The child had not understood the gravity of the trial, yet she had managed to impact every person present in subtle, meaningful ways. As the trial resumed, the little girl's gaze remained partly on the dog, her small finger lowering, but her eyes still bright with fascination. The officer kept a careful watch, ensuring the dog remained disciplined while allowing the brief connection to persist. The judge, though now fully engaged in the proceedings, carried the warmth of the earlier moment in his demeanor. Even the defendant, slightly disarmed by the scene, felt a lingering sense of ease in the room. The child's words, brief as they were, had created a resonance that stretched beyond comprehension, touching everyone present. By the end of the morning, the courtroom had subtly transformed. Jurors leaned slightly more comfortably in their seats. Attorneys maintained a less rigid posture, and the spectators seemed lighter, buoyed by the brief intrusion of innocence into the serious proceedings. The mother quietly beamed at her daughter, whose small gesture and clear, honest words had altered the atmosphere in a space defined by rules, tension, and formality. The child had not just observed. She had participated in shaping the mood, reminding everyone that even in the gravest circumstances, small acts of clarity and kindness could hold extraordinary power. By the end of the day, the courtroom had returned to its normal rhythm, with testimony continuing and legal arguments unfolding. Yet, the moment of innocence, the 3-year-old's simple 2 words, "Good boy," lingered in everyone's minds. News of the incident had already begun to ripple outward. A court clerk, amused by the unusual event, quietly shared the story with a local journalist. Within hours, a short description of the child's brief but poignant interruption was circulating online. Social media users quickly picked up on it, captivated by the contrast of a serious trial and the heartwarming simplicity of the girl's observation. Video clips, captured by court staff or public observers, showed the child pointing at the dog, her voice clear and unwavering despite the formality of the room. The judge's subtle, warm reaction became part of the footage, along with the gentle acknowledgement of the canine officer and the composed, patient behavior of the police dog. In a few minutes, the clip had gone viral, not for controversy, but for its humanity. Comments flooded in from around the city, the state, and even beyond, praising the innocence of the child, the disciplined nature of the dog, and the rare warmth displayed by the judge. It was a story that reminded viewers of something universal, that even small, unassuming gestures could resonate deeply. The mother, initially overwhelmed by the attention, was soon fielding calls from friends, neighbors, and relatives. She recounted the moment in detail, how her daughter had been captivated by the dog, how the courtroom had paused, and how the judge had responded with gentle recognition. She explained that her daughter didn't fully understand the trial, nor did she know the weight of her words. Yet, her curiosity and honesty had struck a chord with everyone who witnessed it. The mother laughed softly at the absurdity and the beauty of it, marveling that a tiny observation could generate so much attention. Locally, the story became a conversation starter. People discussed the unusual bond between humans and animals, the innocence of children, and the ways in which simple gestures could break tension in otherwise rigid environments. Social media posts shared not only the video, but also reflections on the event. Captions praised the child's courage, the dog's discipline, and the judge's humanity. Some comments emphasized how rare it was to see such moments of authenticity in formal spaces. Others shared personal stories of children, noticing little things that adults overlooked, creating a wave of nostalgia and appreciation. Community members, inspired by the story, reflected on their own experiences with animals, children, and unexpected moments of connection. Pet owners shared images of their own dogs, accompanied by tales of surprising intelligence or calmness in the presence of strangers. Parents recounted similar instances of their children, speaking or acting with profound insight, often in ways that adults would have dismissed as trivial. Local news stations ran segments highlighting the story, interviewing the mother, the officer, and even the judge, though the latter remained understated, emphasizing the importance of human observation, patience, and empathy in all walks of life. The police department received attention as well, with the K-9 unit praised for the dog's calm and disciplined behavior in a tense environment. The officer, accustomed to handling chaos and unpredictable situations, described the event as unexpectedly touching. He spoke about the bond between a handler and a dog, explaining that the animal's training ensured composure in almost any scenario. Yet even he admitted that the child's simple words had transformed the energy in the courtroom. It was a reminder, he said, that sometimes the smallest, most genuine gestures, spoken without agenda or expectation, could have the most profound effect. The defendant, whose case had been serious and tense just hours earlier, remarked quietly to his attorney that the moment with the child and the dog had lightened the mood of the day. He admitted that he would not soon forget the innocence and clarity of the young girl, whose curiosity had forced everyone, even adults with years of experience, to pause and consider the humanity around them. It was a lesson in perspective, an unexpected reprieve from tension, and a story he would carry beyond the courthouse walls. The mother began receiving messages from viewers and readers who had seen the clip online. Some expressed amusement, others admiration, and many expressed gratitude for the reminder that innocence, observation, and empathy still existed in the world. The little girl, unaware of her growing fame, continued to talk animatedly about the dog at home, describing him in ways only a 3-year-old could: big ears, soft fur, good boy. Her parents laughed and smiled, cherishing the memory that would remain long after the courtroom moment had faded. Even within professional circles, the story gained traction. Legal analysts and commentators noted the unusual nature of the event, discussing how children's presence in courtrooms can humanize proceedings. The judge's warm acknowledgement of the child was widely praised as a demonstration of empathy and emotional intelligence, traits often overshadowed by legal procedure. Social workers, educators, and parents alike cited the story as an example of how early observation skills, natural curiosity, and empathy could be encouraged and celebrated in children. The incident became a touchpoint for discussions about human behavior, emotional connection, and the unexpected power of small, simple gestures. By evening, the story had transcended the courtroom, becoming a reminder to the public that even in environments dominated by rules, order, and seriousness, moments of warmth and connection could emerge. It reminded people that observation, honesty, and kindness could exist anywhere, often in ways adults might overlook. The 3-year-old girl's words, too small, unassuming words, had left an indelible mark, touching the hearts of strangers, colleagues, officials, and community members alike. They became a symbol of how innocence could penetrate seriousness, reminding all that human connection and empathy are timeless and universal. The mother, reflecting on the day, realized that her daughter's simple act had unexpectedly reached thousands. She marveled at the child's ability to notice the dog and voice her thoughts in such a direct, heartfelt manner. The girl had not set out to make headlines. She had simply spoken from curiosity and kindness. Yet, in doing so, she had reminded everyone of the quiet, profound ways that children teach adults about observation, honesty, and human connection. For the mother, it was a lesson she would never forget, a moment to cherish and recount for years. As the story circulated further, local communities celebrated the event as more than just a fleeting viral moment. Schools, community centers, and parents shared the narrative with children, highlighting the lessons of empathy, observation, and calmness in stressful situations. The police department used it internally to show how human and animal partnerships could influence even formal spaces in unexpected ways. Across the city, adults smiled when recounting the day's events, recalling the 3-year-old girl who had simply said, "Good boy," and in doing so, had reminded everyone that compassion and innocence still mattered. By the end of the week, the courtroom moment had become more than a story. It was a phenomenon. People discussed it in cafes, on social media, and in family homes. The K-9 unit became a quiet local hero alongside the child, celebrated for discipline, patience, and composure. The judge, though understated, received praise for his warmth and awareness, showing that even in positions of authority, empathy and human connection matter. The mother and her daughter became minor celebrities in their own right, cherished not for fame, but for embodying something universal, the beauty of innocence, honesty, and quiet observation in a complex world. While the courtroom buzzed with speculation and admiration for the little girl's words, another story quietly unfolded behind the scenes, one that belonged to the police dog. The German shepherd, named Rex, was not merely a trained animal. He was a partner, a colleague, and a silent guardian whose life had been built on discipline, trust, and countless hours of meticulous training. Rex had faced chaotic situations before high-speed chases, search and rescue missions, and tense confrontations, but today was different. Today, he had become part of a story that transcended law enforcement, reaching into the hearts of those who witnessed it. Rex's journey to the courtroom had begun months earlier in a rigorous police training academy. He had been selected for his intelligence, calm demeanor, and keen observation skills. His days had been filled with obedience drills, agility exercises, and simulated emergency scenarios designed to prepare him for the unpredictable realities of police work. Each day was structured with precision, building not only his physical abilities, but also his mental focus. His training instilled in him the capacity to remain composed under extreme stress, to interpret subtle cues from his handler, and to respond without hesitation, a skill set that would define him as an exceptional K-9. The officer, a seasoned handler named Sergeant Daniel Whitman, had trained alongside Rex from the beginning. Their partnership was built on mutual trust, respect, and understanding. Daniel knew Rex's strengths and limitations, while Rex responded intuitively to Daniel's commands, gestures, and even subtle expressions. Together, they formed a team capable of handling life-or-death situations with precision and calm. Yet, despite the intensity of their work, Daniel often marveled at Rex's quiet presence. The dog had an uncanny ability to sense tension, to offer reassurance through mere proximity, and to communicate without words, a trait that had drawn the attention of the little girl in the courtroom. Back in the gallery, the child's eyes remained fixed on Rex. She tilted her head slightly, trying to understand why this animal seemed so calm when everyone else around him was tense, nervous, or anxious. To her young mind, the courtroom was an overwhelming space rose of adults, a sea of seriousness, and the low hum of whispers and shuffling papers. Yet, amidst it all, Rex existed as a constant, a pillar of serenity. He did not bark, move abruptly, or react to sudden noises. He simply observed, alert yet composed, exuding a sense of quiet reassurance that the girl instinctively recognized. Sergeant Whitman observed the interaction with a mixture of professional awareness and personal amusement. He knew that children often notice things adults overlooked, the subtleties of expression, the nuances of body language, and the silent language of animals. The little girl had, without instruction, recognized something extraordinary about Rex, his calm, steady presence, and his ability to maintain composure amid chaos. Daniel watched her point and speak those two words, "Good boy," with pride and a touch of wonder. To him, it was a reminder of why he trained these animals so diligently, not just for law enforcement, but for the connections they could form with humans, even the youngest among them. The courtroom's formality contrasted sharply with the simplicity of this bond. While adults debated evidence and legal strategy, the child and the dog communicated in a language older than words. A gentle wag of the tail, a slight shift in posture, a soft gaze, these were signals that both parties understood perfectly. For Rex, the presence of the child was a non-threatening anomaly, a harmless observer whose curiosity did not disturb the rhythm of the courtroom. For the girl, Rex's calm demeanor was captivating, almost magical, offering a sense of safety and familiarity in an otherwise intimidating environment. Daniel reflected on the training that had led to this point. Rex had spent countless hours learning to ignore distractions, to remain steadfast in the face of loud noises, unpredictable movements, and human unpredictability. Every command, every reinforcement, every carefully structured exercise had prepared him for moments like this, not for the drama of court, but for the subtle interactions that test discipline and patience in the quietest of ways. In many ways, today was a testament to Rex's training. A child's gaze could not unsettle him. Instead, it became a bridge for connection, a demonstration of his steadiness and reliability. The mother watched her daughter, silently marveling at the subtle communication unfolding before her. She had never expected that a courtroom visit, a setting so formal and serious, would become an arena for her child to experience such profound curiosity and connection. The little girl's eyes sparkled with wonder as she studied Rex, noticing the way his ears twitched slightly in response to movement, the way his tail rested gracefully on the mat, and the way his gaze, unwavering and attentive, seemed to acknowledge her presence. It was an unspoken dialogue, yet it resonated with clarity that words could not capture. Even the judge, observing from the bench, was aware of the quiet exchange. Though his primary responsibility was to oversee the trial, he could not help but notice the rare bond forming between child and dog. In the midst of procedural formalities and legal arguments, this small, unscripted moment reminded him of the human dimension often overlooked in law. Children, animals, and simple gestures, these elements could transform a tense environment, soften hearts, and remind all present that law and humanity were not mutually exclusive. Rex remained composed, a model of discipline and patience. He had been trained to face emergencies, to handle confrontations, and to obey commands without hesitation. Yet, this moment the child's fascination, her simple words of praise, was perhaps more meaningful in its subtlety than any high-intensity situation he had ever encountered. For Daniel, it was a reminder that the value of a police dog extended beyond law enforcement. It was about the capacity to connect, to observe, and to provide calm assurance in the midst of stress. The little girl, captivated by Rex, whispered softly to her mother, "He's so nice." Her words, though barely audible, carried sincerity and observation beyond her years. The mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead, recognizing that this moment between her daughter and the dog was one of learning, curiosity, and quiet understanding. The courtroom, despite its formal structure, had become a classroom of sorts, where empathy, observation, and connection were taught not through lectures or rules, but through the natural interaction of innocence and experience. Throughout the trial, Rex continued to display unwavering composure. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the room, noting the movements of the officers, the judge, and even the defendant, yet never breaking his calm. The little girl remained focused on him, absorbing the details, the tilt of his head, the slight adjustment of his posture, the subtle acknowledgement of her presence. In her young mind, he was not just a police dog. He was a teacher, a friend, and a source of quiet courage. By the end of the morning, the courtroom had been transformed by this small, silent story. The public attention that followed, the discussions in social media and local news, and the admiration of witnesses and spectators, all traced back to one constant figure, Rex, the disciplined, patient police dog. Behind every smile, every good boy, and every nod of recognition was a story of dedication, training, and quiet strength. And through it all, the little girl's curiosity had created a bridge, connecting the world of adult seriousness with the timeless simplicity of observation and connection. The officer, aware of the moment's significance, allowed himself a rare smile. Rex had not only fulfilled his professional duties, but had done so in a way that touched the hearts of everyone present. The child's words had amplified his training, highlighting the intangible value of trust, patience, and presence. In that quiet, unassuming courtroom, Rex had reminded everyone, including a small child, a judge, and an entire audience, that discipline and empathy, observation and connection, coexist in the simplest and most profound ways. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the tall courtroom windows, illuminating the polished wooden benches and the faces of those gathered for the day's proceedings. The trial was approaching its conclusion, and the tension in the room, though tempered by earlier moments of levity, remained palpable. Lawyers were preparing their closing arguments, witnesses were taking their final statements, and the judge reviewed notes with careful precision. Yet beneath the formality and seriousness, the memory of a 3-year-old girl and her simple words, "Good boy," lingered like a quiet heartbeat, softening the atmosphere and touching everyone in subtle, unexpected ways. The little girl remained in the gallery with her mother, her eyes darting occasionally between Rex and the proceedings below. Despite her youth, she seemed aware that something important was happening. Though she did not understand the intricacies of law, she sensed the gravity of the room and the anticipation in the air. She leaned forward slightly, tiny hands gripping the bench, her gaze steady on Rex as if seeking reassurance. The dog, trained for countless high-pressure situations, continued to embody calm authority, his presence a silent anchor in a sea of legal complexity. Sergeant Whitman adjusted Rex's leash gently, ensuring the dog remained composed, and gave a brief nod to the little girl in acknowledgement of her attention. The officer understood that this moment was more than procedural. It was a subtle, human connection that transcended words. Rex had performed perfectly, remaining disciplined throughout hours of testimony and argument. And yet the most memorable interaction of the day had been quiet and unassuming. The child's 2 words, her pointed finger, and the dog's patient acknowledgement. The courtroom's energy shifted subtly as closing arguments began. The prosecution spoke with practiced fervor, laying out the evidence with clarity and emphasis. The defendant's attorney countered, presenting interpretations of events, timelines, and witness credibility. Jurors leaned forward, taking careful notes, their expressions a mixture of concentration and fatigue. In the midst of all this, the girl's gaze remained fixed on Rex. She occasionally whispered to her mother, asking questions in her 3-year-old voice. Why does he stay so still? Is he listening to everyone? Her mother smiled, answering patiently, Yes, sweetheart, he's trained to be calm and watchful. The child nodded solemnly, processing the information with a focus far beyond her years. The judge, observing both the trial and the gallery, allowed the proceedings to continue with a measured tone. His earlier smile and acknowledgement of the child had set a subtle precedent. Humanity and formality could coexist. He occasionally glanced toward the gallery, noting the child's attentive observation of Rex and the effect it had on those around her. Even seasoned attorneys, hardened by years of courtroom experience, found themselves softened by the innocence on display. The trial's intensity was undeniable, yet it was tempered by the quiet presence of a child and a dog, whose interaction spoke volumes without a single command or legal argument. As the closing arguments concluded, the judge prepared to give final instructions to the jury. He spoke with authority, laying out the responsibilities of the jurors and emphasizing the importance of impartiality, careful review of evidence, and deliberation based on facts rather than emotion. The jurors listened attentively, taking notes and nodding in understanding. Yet, despite the weight of his words, the memory of the child's gesture and the dog's calm demeanor lingered in their minds. It was a moment that reminded them, subtly but powerfully, of the human dimension present in every case, every testimony, and every decision they were about to make. Once the jury was excused for deliberation, the courtroom atmosphere shifted again. Spectators exchanged quiet conversations, reflecting on the day's proceedings and, inevitably, the unexpected highlight, the interaction between a toddler and a police dog. The defendant leaned back in his seat, momentarily relaxing, his tension eased by the subtle warmth that had entered the courtroom earlier. The judge, though maintaining his professional demeanor, allowed himself a few moments of reflection, recognizing that the smallest, simplest gestures could resonate far beyond what anyone might anticipate. In the gallery, the little girl leaned forward one last time before leaving, her small hand brushing lightly against the edge of the bench. She whispered softly, "Bye, good boy," her voice carrying a mix of affection and admiration. Rex, trained and disciplined, acknowledged the gesture with a gentle flick of his tail. Sergeant Whitman nodded, a soft smile crossing his face. The child had not understood the full weight of the trial, nor had she comprehended the legal outcome yet. But she had experienced something profound, a quiet connection, observation, and the knowledge that her words and attention had mattered. Outside the courtroom, the media presence continued to grow. The story of a 3-year-old girl, a police dog, and a judge's subtle acknowledgement captured hearts across the city. Local news stations interviewed witnesses, reporters, and community members, all sharing their reflections on the moment. Social media platforms were flooded with clips, photos, and commentary. People admired the child's innocence, the dog's disciplined presence, and the judge's human response. Even strangers who had not been present in the courtroom felt touched, inspired, and reminded of the power of simple acts and genuine attention. The police department, proud of Rex's professionalism, shared the story with the public, highlighting the dog's training, discipline, and calmness. They emphasized the importance of K-9 units in maintaining safety and order, while also noting the intangible benefits of these partnerships: empathy, human-animal connection, and the ability to provide calm reassurance in stressful environments. Sergeant Whitman spoke about the significance of Rex's role, not just in law enforcement, but in moments like these moments where observation, patience, and quiet presence could touch hearts and change perspectives. The little girl and her mother returned home that evening, carrying with them a sense of wonder and quiet pride. The child chattered excitedly about Rex, describing every detail she had noticed: the tilt of his head, the soft flick of his tail, the calmness in his eyes. She recounted her favorite moments repeatedly, her voice animated and filled with joy. Her mother listened, smiling and occasionally laughing, reflecting on how an ordinary visit to a courtroom had become an extraordinary experience, both for her daughter and for everyone who had witnessed it. Weeks later, the trial concluded. The jury returned with a verdict, fulfilling their legal responsibilities with careful deliberation. The courtroom returned to its routine: papers filed, decisions documented, procedures followed. Yet the memory of the little girl's words, the interaction with Rex, and the judge's subtle acknowledgement remained embedded in the minds of those present. It became a story retold not for legal drama, but for the human connection. It represented a reminder that even in the most formal spaces, small gestures and moments of observation could resonate powerfully. In the years that followed, the story lived on. Community members continued to reference it as a reminder of the importance of empathy, observation, and kindness. Schools shared it as an example of learning through observation. Parents used it to teach children about noticing the world around them, and law enforcement highlighted the value of human-animal partnerships. The courtroom moment, brief as it was, had transcended its immediate context, becoming a symbol of the unexpected beauty found in simple gestures, honesty, and attention to detail. And for the little girl, Rex, and Sergeant Whitman, the story remained personal and profound. The child had learned, in her own way, the value of observation, kindness, and courage. Rex had once again demonstrated the extraordinary power of discipline, calmness, and presence. Sergeant Whitman had witnessed firsthand how the bond between a child and a dog could influence an entire courtroom, softening hearts and reminding all present of the quiet humanity at the center of every encounter. Months had passed since the courtroom moment that captured hearts across the city. The trial was long over, the verdict delivered, and the legal papers filed. Yet the memory of a 3-year-old girl, a police dog, and a judge's gentle acknowledgement continued to resonate with everyone who had witnessed it. For some, it had become a story of community, empathy, and the subtle beauty of human connection. For others, it was a personal reminder of the innocence and wisdom found in children, and the quiet strength embodied by animals trained to serve and protect. The little girl, now slightly older and full of curiosity, often asked her mother to tell the story again. She would recount the events in her own words: the tall, serious judge, the big dog with soft fur, and how she had said, "Good boy." Her mother would listen, laughing softly, amazed by how vividly her daughter remembered the details. For the girl, it had been more than a courtroom experience. It was a lesson in observation, courage, and empathy. The memory of Rex's calm demeanor stayed with her, a symbol of patience and reassurance that transcended words. Rex, the police dog, continued his duties with Sergeant Whitman, patrolling streets, participating in training exercises, and attending community demonstrations. Yet, he had become more than just a law enforcement partner. He had become a quiet symbol of discipline, steadiness, and the subtle ways animals could teach humans about calm and presence. During community events, children would flock to him, pointing and whispering excitedly, recalling the story they had seen online or heard in school. Rex, ever patient, accepted the attention with the same composed demeanor that had so captivated the little girl months ago. Sergeant Whitman often reflected on that day in court. He recalled the child's small hand pointing toward Rex, her tiny voice saying two simple words that carried extraordinary impact. "Good boy," she had said, unaware of the resonance those words would create. For him, the moment reinforced a simple truth. The bond between a canine and the public was not just about law enforcement. It was about trust, observation, and subtle human connection. The child's recognition of Rex's calm authority had reminded him why he devoted himself to this work. It was about more than procedures. It was about humanity. The mother, too, carried the memory with quiet pride. She often spoke about it to friends and family, recounting the awe she felt watching her daughter navigate a formal, intimidating space with curiosity and honesty. She marveled at how her tiny child had managed to affect an entire courtroom, even influencing the judge, the jurors, and those seated in the gallery. To her, it was a lesson in the profound power of innocence, the ability to cut through tension, to recognize what others overlook, and to convey understanding without pretense. The judge, who rarely displayed emotion in public, also reflected privately on the moment. In chambers, he recounted the day to colleagues with a mixture of amusement and reverence. He noted how the little girl's words had briefly transformed the courtroom, humanizing a space typically dominated by rules and protocol. For him, it was a reminder that even in positions of authority, humility and empathy were essential. It was a lesson that procedural correctness need not exclude human warmth and recognition. And that sometimes the smallest gestures, words from a child, a quiet observation, could resonate far beyond their immediate context. News outlets continued to feature the story in human interest segments. Local newspapers ran follow-up pieces, interviewing the child's mother, Sergeant Whitman, and members of the courtroom staff who had witnessed the interaction. Social media platforms continued to share clips of the moment, accompanied by reflections on the emotional impact it had created. Teachers used the story to illustrate lessons about observation, empathy, and the unexpected power of small actions. Community centers hosted discussions on human-animal connections, and even city officials cited the story as an example of the subtle ways civility and care manifest in public life. The child herself, unaware of her growing celebrity, developed a fascination with animals, particularly dogs. She often asked her mother if she could visit the police station to see Rex again, wanting to understand more about how he worked and why he remained so calm. Sergeant Whitman, recognizing the potential to inspire curiosity and empathy, allowed brief visits where the girl could observe Rex's training exercises. She would watch attentively, her small hands folded in concentration, occasionally asking questions about commands, posture, and behavior. Through these visits, she learned lessons far beyond her years about discipline, patience, and the silent ways animals communicate trust and attentiveness. The courtroom that day had inadvertently sparked a ripple effect of inspiration. Children and adults alike spoke of the moment in which innocence met discipline, observation met calm, and humanity met authority. Classes in schools discussed how small acts of acknowledgement could have profound effects. Local community organizations cited the story in programs designed to foster empathy and awareness. Police departments highlighted Rex's discipline and patience as a case study in canine training, showing how a well-trained dog could positively influence not just law enforcement outcomes, but also public perception and emotional resonance. Years later, the story remained a touchstone. The little girl, now older, remembered that courtroom moment with vivid clarity. She spoke about it in school projects, shared the tale with friends, and recounted it with pride to her family. The lessons stayed with her. Observing, acknowledging, and offering gentle recognition could have a ripple effect far beyond immediate perception. Rex's calm presence remained emblematic of stability and patience, while the memory of her own words reminded her that even small gestures, two simple words, could leave a lasting impression on a world often dominated by seriousness. rules, and structure. Sergeant Whitman eventually retired Rex from active duty, though the dog remained a symbol of calm authority and community connection. Rex spent his retirement interacting with children in community programs, visiting schools, and attending demonstrations where his presence conveyed lessons of discipline, patience, and observation. The child, now familiar with Rex's routines, continued to visit, learning from him and delighting in the quiet communication that needed no words. Together, they embodied a bond that had transcended the courtroom and touched countless lives. The judge, reflecting on the event even years later, would occasionally recount the story to colleagues as an example of the subtle ways humanity reveals itself in formal spaces. He emphasized that even amidst tension, protocol, and authority, moments of innocence, recognition, and empathy could occur sometimes from the most unexpected sources. The girl's 2 words, "Good boy," remained emblematic of the human capacity to notice, acknowledge, and connect, regardless of age or circumstance. Ultimately, the story endured because it was simple, genuine, and deeply human. It was a tale of a child, a dog, and a judge who collectively demonstrated that empathy, observation, and kindness matter, even in the most serious of places. The little girl learned a profound lesson in noticing and valuing what others might overlook. Rex demonstrated patience, composure, and the quiet influence of presence. Sergeant Whitman and the judge were reminded that small gestures of honesty, recognition, and understanding can ripple outward in ways that are far greater than the moment itself. The courtroom, once a place of tension and formality, had transformed temporarily into a space of warmth, connection, and human resonance. That moment, brief and unassuming, remained etched in the memory of all who witnessed it. For the child, Rex, the officer, and the judge, it was a reminder that every interaction holds the potential for kindness, understanding, and subtle yet profound impact. It was proof that even the smallest words, spoken from honesty and innocence, can shape the hearts and minds of those around them. Years later, when the little girl recounted the story, she would smile, her eyes lighting up with the memory of Rex and the calm presence he had embodied. She would say softly, almost to herself, "Good boy," remembering the moment she had first spoken those words in a room full of adults, a courtroom that had held tension and authority, and how the simple act of observation and acknowledgement had left an enduring mark. And for all who had witnessed it, the lesson remained clear. Humanity thrives not in grand gestures alone, but often in the quiet recognition of another being, a patient smile, and the courage to speak from the heart.